Every morning, before you eat breakfast, before you take your medication, before you even brush your teeth, your arteries are already deciding how hard your heart is going to have to work today. And for most people over 60, that decision is being made badly because of what happens in the first 10 minutes after you wake up. Cardiologists have a name for it: morning vascular tone. Right now, your blood is thicker than it will be at any other point in the day. Your blood vessels are tighter. Your blood pressure is naturally spiking. This is why heart attacks and strokes happen more between 6 and 10 in the morning than at any other window. Nearly 40% of all cardiac events cluster right there. And the compound your body needs most in that window, the one that tells your arteries to relax and open, is the exact compound that collapses fastest as we age. It's called nitric oxide, and by 60, most people are producing less than half of what they made at 30. Here's the problem, and it's not what you'd expect. Doctors don't usually test for this. There's no standard blood panel that flags low nitric oxide the way a lipid panel flags high cholesterol. So it goes unnoticed, and it gets blamed on other things. Blamed on just getting older. Blamed on stress. Blamed on genetics. A 2021 study out of the American Heart Association's Hypertension Journal tracked endothelial function, that's the lining of your blood vessels, across nearly 3,000 adults and found that nitric oxide bioavailability declines by roughly 10 to 12% per decade after age 40. By the time you're 65, you may be working with less than half the vasodilation capacity you had at 35. Nitric oxide is what allows your arteries to widen when your heart needs more blood flow. During a walk up the stairs, during a stressful phone call, during that first cup of coffee. When that system is weak, your arteries stay stiffer than they should, your blood pressure runs higher than it needs to, and your heart has to generate more force to push blood through narrower channels. Framingham Heart Study data going back decades shows arterial stiffness measured by something called pulse wave velocity is one of the single strongest predictors of cardiovascular events in adults over 60, often a stronger predictor than cholesterol numbers alone. And the frustrating part is this: you can have a normal cholesterol panel, a normal blood pressure reading at the doctor's office, and still be walking around with arteries that have lost most of their flexibility. Nobody is measuring the one system that's actually failing. Doctors at the Cleveland Clinic have pointed out that endothelial dysfunction, the technical term for this loss of nitric oxide signaling, can show up on specialized vascular testing 10 to 15 years before a standard cardiac workup flags any problem at all. By the time cholesterol or blood pressure numbers move enough to trigger a conversation with your doctor, the arteries themselves may have already been losing flexibility for over a decade. That's the gap this video is aimed at closing, not replacing your doctor, but giving you a way to support the one system that quietly runs the whole show and rarely gets mentioned in a routine visit. Think about how this actually plays out in a person's life. A 63-year-old who walks 3 times a week, eats reasonably well, and gets a clean annual physical can still be dealing with morning headaches, cold hands and feet, and a creeping fatigue that doesn't match how healthy their chart looks. That mismatch, feeling worse than your numbers suggest you should, is one of the most common patterns cardiologists who specialize in vascular aging report hearing from patients in their 60s. It's rarely a single dramatic finding. It's a slow accumulation of reduced blood flow to the extremities, the brain, and the heart muscle itself, all traceable back to arteries that have lost some of their ability to open on demand. None of that shows up as a diagnosis. It shows up as, "I just don't feel like myself in the mornings anymore." Which is exactly the phrase this video keeps coming back to, because it's the phrase that sends people searching for answers instead of a name for what's happening. So let's talk about root cause number 1, because this is the part almost nobody explains clearly. Nitric oxide isn't something you eat directly. Your body manufactures it, using an enzyme called endothelial nitric oxide synthase, or eNOS for short, which lives in the thin layer of cells lining every one of your blood vessels. Think of eNOS as a tiny factory sitting inside the artery wall, and its job is to convert an amino acid called L-arginine into nitric oxide gas, which then diffuses into the surrounding muscle and tells it to relax. As we age, 3 things happen to that factory. First, the raw materials, L-arginine and its more efficient cousin L-citrulline, decline in the bloodstream, partly from diet, partly from reduced absorption. Second, the eNOS enzyme itself becomes less efficient, partly due to a buildup of a molecule called ADMA, asymmetric dimethylarginine, which actually blocks the enzyme from working, almost like a key that fits the lock but won't turn it. A landmark study in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology found that elevated ADMA levels were independently associated with a 30% higher risk of major cardiovascular events precisely because it's choking off nitric oxide production at the source. Third, and this is the part most people have never heard, your body has a backup system for making nitric oxide that doesn't rely on the eNOS enzyme at all. It relies on dietary nitrates, the kind found in beets, arugula, and leafy greens, which get converted step by step, first into nitrite, then into nitric oxide, through a pathway that involves bacteria living on the back of your tongue. Researchers at the University of Texas and Karolinska Institute in Sweden have shown this nitrate to nitrite to nitric oxide pathway becomes increasingly important with age, precisely because the primary eNOS pathway is declining. In other words, nature built you a backup generator for exactly this problem. Most people over 60 simply don't know it exists, let alone how to use it. To picture how the two systems relate, think of the eNOS enzyme as your body's main power plant, running on L-arginine, and think of the nitrate-nitrite-nitric oxide pathway as a portable generator that runs on completely different fuel. The nitrates naturally concentrated in beets, spinach, arugula, and celery. When the main power plant slows down with age, the portable generator becomes the thing keeping the lights on. Researchers have actually measured this shift directly. In older adults, a much higher share of circulating nitric oxide comes from the dietary nitrate pathway than in younger adults, where the eNOS enzyme still does most of the work on its own. That's not a coincidence. It looks very much like an adaptation, the body leaning harder on the backup system precisely because it senses the primary one weakening. Which means the question isn't whether your body can still make enough nitric oxide after 60. It's whether you're giving it the raw materials the backup system needs, and whether you're accidentally cutting off the delivery route. There's also a structural piece to this that has nothing to do with chemistry. Your artery walls contain two proteins, elastin and collagen, that give them the ability to stretch with each heartbeat and spring back. Elastin fibers, in particular, are laid down almost entirely in childhood and early adulthood. Your body makes very little new elastin after your 20s, and the elastin you have degrades slowly over decades of mechanical stress, roughly one heartbeat at a time, somewhere around 2.5 to 3 billion beats over a lifetime by the time you reach your 60s. That means the pipes themselves get physically stiffer with age, independent of anything happening chemically. Nitric oxide can't reverse that structural aging directly, but it can do the next best thing. It relaxes the smooth muscle layer surrounding those stiffer pipes, which is often enough to meaningfully lower the resistance your heart has to push against, even when the underlying elastin and collagen have already changed. This is why cardiologists frame nitric oxide support as managing what's still adjustable, rather than claiming to undo 40 years of wear in a bottle. Root cause number 2 is the one that tends to catch people off guard, because it sounds like a health habit, not a health problem. Antibacterial mouthwash. If you use it every morning, and a lot of people over 60 do, especially if a dentist recommended it for gum health, you may be shutting down that backup nitric oxide pathway before it ever gets started. Remember those bacteria on the back of your tongue we just talked about? They're not random. They're a specific population of oral bacteria that reduce dietary nitrate into nitrite, the direct precursor to nitric oxide. A study published in the journal Free Radical Biology and Medicine had participants use antibacterial mouthwash twice a day for 1 week and measured their nitric oxide production before and after. The result, a 90% drop in oral nitrite-reducing bacteria, and a measurable rise in blood pressure within days. In some participants, a jump of 2 to 3.5 millimeters of mercury in systolic pressure, simply from killing the bacteria that make this pathway work. Researchers at Queen Mary University of London followed this up and confirmed the same pattern. Wipe out those oral bacteria, and you wipe out a meaningful chunk of your body's ability to convert food into nitric oxide, right when you need that pathway most. This doesn't mean abandon oral hygiene. It means timing matters. There's also a second, quieter version of this problem. Acid-reducing medications. Proton pump inhibitors, taken by an enormous share of people over 60 for reflux, reduce stomach acid. And stomach acid is a required step in the nitrate to nitrite conversion process further down the pathway. So if you're on a PPI and using antibacterial mouthwash, you may be blocking this backup system at two different points without ever knowing it, while your primary eNOS pathway is already declining from age. That's two roads closed on a route your body needs to survive. There's a third, smaller factor worth naming here too: chewing. The nitrate-reducing bacteria we're talking about live in the crevices on the back of the tongue, and they work best when nitrate-rich foods are chewed thoroughly, mixing plant material with saliva before swallowing. Gulping a smoothie or juice too quickly bypasses much of that oral contact time. It's a small detail, but clinicians who study this pathway specifically recommend holding a nitrate-rich drink in the mouth for a few seconds before swallowing, precisely to give those bacteria a chance to start the conversion before the liquid moves on. Root cause number 3 is simpler, but it compounds everything we've just covered. What you do, or don't do, in the first hour after waking up. Overnight, you lose water simply through breathing and normal metabolism. And by morning, your blood is measurably more concentrated, more viscous, than it will be later in the day. Thicker blood is harder to push through stiff arteries, and it also reduces something called shear stress, the physical friction of blood flowing against the artery wall, which is actually one of the main triggers that switches on your eNOS enzyme in the first place. Less fluid movement, less shear stress, less nitric oxide activation. It's a chain reaction. On top of that, most people's first move in the morning is caffeine, which is a mild diuretic and can nudge that dehydration further before you've addressed it. And most people's second move is staying seated, coffee at the table, scrolling the phone, sitting for the first 30 to 60 minutes of the day, which means no movement, no shear stress, no signal to the arteries to wake up their nitric oxide production. So you've got age-related decline in the primary pathway, oral and digestive habits potentially blocking the backup pathway, and a morning routine that does nothing to activate either one. That's the full picture. And it's also exactly why this is fixable, because every piece of it is a habit, not a diagnosis. There's one more layer worth mentioning because it explains why this pattern is worse for some people than others. Sodium and potassium balance. A diet that runs high in processed sodium and low in potassium-rich foods, fresh vegetables, fruit, legumes, pushes fluid retention patterns that make blood vessels work against extra pressure even before nitric oxide enters the picture. The American Heart Association has long pointed to the sodium to potassium ratio, not sodium alone, as the more meaningful number for blood pressure risk, and mornings are typically when the effects of the previous day's ratio are most apparent, because your kidneys have spent all night trying to rebalance it. That's part of why the electrolyte step in this protocol includes potassium specifically, rather than just salt and water. Here's the protocol, in 4 specific steps, in the order they need to happen. Step 1. Before coffee, before anything else, drink 16 ounces of water with a 1/4 teaspoon of sea salt or a pinch of a potassium-rich electrolyte blend, plus the juice of half a lemon. This rehydrates your blood volume before you add a diuretic like caffeine on top of overnight fluid loss, and the electrolytes, specifically sodium, potassium, and magnesium, support the fluid balance your vascular system needs to keep blood moving efficiently. Do this within the first 5 minutes of being upright. Step 2. 15 to 20 minutes later, have your nitrate-rich drink. The most researched option is concentrated beet juice, about 2 to 4 ounces, which delivers roughly 400 milligrams of dietary nitrate, the amount used in most of the clinical trials, showing measurable blood pressure reduction, typically in the range of 4 to 10 millimeters of mercury systolic within 2 to 3 hours. If beet juice isn't for you, a tablespoon of pomegranate concentrate or a cup of arugula blended into a smoothie provides a similar nitrate load. The key number to look for, if you're buying a product, is nitrate content around 400 milligrams. Most quality beet juice shots on the market are formulated right around that dose. One more label detail worth checking. Some beet products are fermented or heat processed in ways that reduce nitrate content substantially, so cold-pressed or raw options tend to test higher. If you'd rather not track milligrams at all, the simplest rule of thumb researchers use is roughly 1 cup of raw leafy greens or 2 to 4 ounces of concentrated beet juice, once a day, consistently. That alone gets most people into the effective range used in the clinical studies. Step 3. Hold off on antibacterial mouthwash until at least 2 hours after this drink, giving the oral bacteria time to complete the nitrate to nitrite conversion before you disrupt them. If you brush your teeth in the morning, that's fine. Just skip the antibacterial rinse specifically until later in the day.
One caution worth stating plainly: if you take blood thinners, blood pressure medication, or have kidney disease, talk to your doctor before adding a daily potassium-rich electrolyte drink or concentrated beet juice, since both potassium and nitrate-driven blood pressure changes can interact with those conditions and medications. This protocol is built around food-based amounts, not concentrated supplements. But food-based doesn't mean check with no one when you're already on medication that affects the same systems.
Step 4. 10 minutes after your nitrate drink, move. Not a workout, just movement. A brisk walk around the block, a few flights of stairs, even 10 minutes of arm circles and marching in place. This creates the shear stress against your artery walls that switches on the ENOS enzyme we talked about earlier, working the primary nitric oxide pathway at the exact moment your backup pathway from the beet juice is also coming online. Researchers studying this combined approach, dietary nitrate plus light aerobic movement, have found the two effects are additive, meaning you get more vascular benefit from doing both together than either one alone. If you're managing this on a tighter budget, the food-based version works too. 2 cups of raw arugula or a large handful of baby spinach blended into water with the lemon juice delivers a comparable nitrate load to a commercial beet shot, and celery, often overlooked, is one of the more concentrated nitrate sources per calorie of any common vegetable. What matters is consistency more than the exact source. Do this sequence consistently, and most people report noticeable changes in energy and in home blood pressure readings within 2 to 4 weeks, not because of one magic ingredient, but because you've reopened 2 separate pathways your body already knows how to use. Now, a few mistakes that quietly cancel this whole protocol out. Mistake 1. Taking your electrolyte drink or beet juice at the exact same time as your morning medications, especially blood pressure medication. Space them by at least 30 minutes, both to avoid interactions and because stacking 2 blood pressure lowering effects at once can occasionally cause lightheadedness, especially if you're prone to low blood pressure on standing. Mistake 2. Reaching for antibacterial mouthwash first thing before the nitrate drink has had time to work. We covered why, but it's the single most common way people accidentally sabotage this protocol without realizing it. Mistake 3. Assuming your morning coffee counts as hydration. It doesn't. Caffeine before water simply accelerates the dehydration you're already dealing with from sleep, and it does nothing for shear stress or nitric oxide production. So keep the order fixed. Water and electrolytes first, then coffee if you want it, after your movement. And a 4th mistake worth naming: giving up after 3 or 4 days, because nothing feels different. Nitric oxide pathways respond to consistency, not a single dose. The clinical trials showing measurable blood pressure change used daily dietary nitrate for 1 to 2 weeks minimum before results stabilized. This is a rebuilding process, not a light switch. And a 5th, doing this protocol but skipping it entirely on weekends or travel days. The oral bacteria populations that drive the nitrate pathway shift within just a couple of days of changed habits. Researchers have observed nitrite-reducing bacteria levels drop measurably after only 2 to 3 days without dietary nitrate or after a course of antibacterial mouthwash. Consistency doesn't mean perfection, but it does mean this isn't a do-it-when-you-remember habit. It works because it's daily. One last mistake, and it's a common one: reaching for a commercial nitric oxide boosting pre-workout powder instead of the food-based approach without reading the label. Many of those products are formulated with stimulants like caffeine or synephrine layered on top of the nitrate compounds, marketed toward younger gym-goers chasing a pump, not toward supporting resting vascular function in a 60-plus body. If you do choose a supplement route over whole foods, look specifically for a product that lists beetroot extract or potassium nitrate as the active ingredient with no added stimulants, and confirm the milligram dose against the 400 milligram nitrate range mentioned earlier, not a proprietary blend that doesn't disclose amounts. Here's the real takeaway. This was never about finding one miracle drink. Your body already has two separate systems built to keep your arteries flexible and your blood pressure where it should be. One built into the lining of every blood vessel you have, and one built into the bacteria on your tongue and the nitrates in your food. Age slows the first system down. Modern habits, antibacterial mouthwash, acid reducers, sedentary mornings, caffeine before water, quietly shut down the second one. Fix the sequence of your first hour, and you're not adding something artificial to your body. You're just getting out of the way of something it already knows how to do. If this opened your eyes to something your doctor hasn't mentioned, hit the like button and subscribe. We cover what doesn't fit in a 10-minute appointment. Visit healthhustleacademy.com. We've put together the exact tools and supplement resources we talk about in these videos. All links are in the description. Take care of your body. Nobody else is going to do it for you.